Tonight's topic is why proof is wrong and good reason is right. I think I'm fighting an uphill battle here. There's a certain natural dialogue, a natural give and take that takes place. If someone says he knows something, it's fair to ask him, how do you know? If he's just guessing, then he can't really say to know it. And the natural vocabulary is to say to him, prove it. If you can prove it, so then not only will I credit you that you know it, but I'll join you. If you can't prove it, then you don't really know it. You could have an opinion. You might believe it, but you don't know it because you can't back it up. Now, usually, though I'll point out an exception in a little while, usually when you use the word proof, what you mean is show that it's got to be true. Nail it down. Rule out any alternative possibility. Because if after you've done your investigation and you've compiled all your reasons, it's still possible you're wrong, then you don't really know you're right. So to back up your claim that you know, you have to provide a proof. The reason I'm against using proof as the standard for knowledge is that, strictly speaking, if prove means to nail it down and show that it's got to be right, strictly speaking, nothing can be proved. And then, if that's your standard, if nothing can be proved, then nothing is known. And if you are a philosophical hero and you're willing to support the conclusion that nothing really is known and all knowledge is an illusion, a mistake, we'll talk about that in about 10 minutes. Well, let's see. I suppose that you think you know who your parents are. Most people would claim to know who their parents are. How do you know? They told you. And you trusted them. How cute. Couldn't they have been lying to you? Aren't there cases where people adopt a child and don't tell the child? Has never happened in history? Certainly it's happened. So you say, but look, my baby pictures look just like them. That's because when they went to the orphanage, they took their baby pictures along, and they picked out a baby that looked like their baby pictures, and that's why you look like them. And you say, I did a DNA test. Well, first of all, you didn't do a DNA test, I know. And second of all, even if you did a DNA test, how do you know that your parent, well, those people didn't pay off the lab to lie to you about the results? You don't know that. Isn't it always possible that they aren't your parents? So now, what are you going to say? Oh, golly, philosophy has taught me that I don't know who my parents are? That I'm just guessing? You know, I'm going to flip a coin? That doesn't sound right either. At least I hope it doesn't sound right. Suppose you're trying to collect a debt. And you go to the guy and say, you borrowed this money from me, I want to be paid. It's past the time when you're supposed to pay it. I want to be paid. He says, I don't owe you the money. You say, what are you talking about? Of course you owe me the money. Look, here's a document that you signed, and appended to it is your fingerprint and your picture. Of course you owe me the money. He says, when is the document dated? It says, dated 3 months ago. He says, prove to me there was a 3 months ago. I say, what? What are you talking about? Prove to me that the universe is 3 months old. I think it's 5 minutes old. I think the whole universe was created 5 minutes ago. Show me wrong. She said, what are you talking about? I remember what happened 10 years ago. No, you were created 5 minutes ago with those, we should call them now pseudo memories, programmed into your brain. The memories are there, but they're not memories of anything real that happened. Well, this was one of Bertrand Russell's puzzles, and to this date, no one has discovered a way to nail down that the universe is more than 5 minutes old. Which means that since the document says that he borrowed the money 3 months ago, it's possible that it wasn't the 3 months ago at all. In which case, he didn't borrow the money. In which case, he doesn't owe it to you. It's all a mistake. So you can't nail it down. You can't eliminate that possibility. Are you going to give up on the money? I don't want to be prejudiced now, I don't want to take money that doesn't belong to me. And since I can't prove that there was a 3 months ago, so therefore I don't really know that you owe me the money, I hope not. I hope that's not what your conclusion is. Descartes started this ball rolling by asking you, how do you know that at this very moment you're not dreaming? All of this is a dream. 10 minutes from now you wake up in the 23rd century, and you say to yourself, that's what I get for reading history books. I jump myself back to this weird place where they're talking about these weird subjects, I have a spaceship from Mars next month, and I'm not missing out on that. What can you do to prove that you're not dreaming at this moment? Do you really need to do this? Is it really correct that in order to back up your claim that you know something, you have to prove it beyond any possible doubt? It just seems wild and extravagant. And if someone says, Rabbi, I thought you were a philosopher. You say it seems wild and extravagant? That's how you refute it? I think we should stick with the criterion of proof. Proof is the only way to back up knowledge. And if we can't prove anything, then we ought to just bite the bullet and admit that we don't have any knowledge. Well, one might ask, how does one get into discussions like this? What is knowledge? What kind of backup does it require? How many things do we know? How many we don't we know? What are the rules of the game here? We're not defining a new concept. We're not inventing a new game. We're taking a concept that's used all over the world. People talk. Most of the time they understand one another. When they look at cases that they're trying to evaluate and describe, most of the time they agree on how to describe them. There are disputes, true. There are disputes around the edges. But the vast majority of the time we do agree who knows what. Someone's going to suggest a definition for a concept which implies that almost everybody who uses the concept is using it wrong almost all the time. We'll have to ask him, how does one decide what definitions to use and what definitions not to use? What kind of evidence can we have? What makes a proposed definition correct or incorrect, other than it makes sense out of the vast majority of what we say? Otherwise, there are no rules to the game. You're getting it right or getting it wrong. In order to come to the conclusion that almost all the usages are wrong, you have to have very strong external evidence and explanation as to what went wrong and why it went wrong and why there's no alternative. It's not a free play. And somebody says, what is justice? I think justice is butterflies. Butterflies? Really? That's just not up for grabs. Justice is a word we use to describe things that people do and things that are right to do and wrong to do and so forth and so on. And in the vast majority of the time, we agree on how it's described. Butterflies, it doesn't fit that usage. We talk about knowledge, we make claims to knowledge, we criticize claims to knowledge, we change our minds. Oh, I thought I knew, but I made a mistake. I'm trying to find out something. I look it up in the encyclopedia. I see it in the encyclopedia. Somebody asked me, I said, this is what it is. How do you know? I saw it in the encyclopedia. So, really? Gee, I have lots of reason to think it's a mistake. Can I see your encyclopedia? I said, sure, here it is. Here's the volume. Here it is. Here's where it says. He said, did you look at the copyright date of this encyclopedia you're using? I said, copyright date? No. Well, take a look. It's 1946. Don't you think you ought to look at a later edition? Oh, gosh. 60 years out of date? 70 years out of date? You're right. I made a mistake. I withdraw my claim to knowledge. I used something that was out of date. We all understand that. So you can't suppose that knowledge requires something which will make almost everything we all say about knowledge wrong unless you have a very, very powerful reason to think that. That's why almost everyone has rejected the idea of proof as the standard for knowledge. And almost everyone has agreed that if such a thing is a good reason, even though it isn't the proof. I have a room, and the floor of this room has been divided into square containers. The whole floor is divided with very, very thin walls. And there are 1,000 containers. 999 of them are black, and one is white. And I saw somebody throw, I don't know where the white one is. I just happen to know there's 999 and they're black and one is white. Somebody throws a ball to the room, bounces around, it lands in one of the containers, but I can't see it. Somebody asked me, what's the color of the container that the ball is in? I said, black. But there's one white one! Yeah, 1 out of 1,000. It's in a black one. And when it turns out that it's a black one, because to know something it's got to be true, someone says, but you could have been wrong. I say, yeah, I could have been wrong, but it was overwhelmingly probable that I'm right, and I am right. That's good enough for knowledge. If that doesn't convince you, let me push you back to the wall this way. Maybe you've heard of entropy. Entropy is that in any closed system, disorder either remains the same or gets bigger. It never gets less. You don't have spontaneous order arising in a system. Now, the standard explanation, entropy, is very controversial, and you'll find all sorts of ideas, but the standard explanation is that the number of ordered states is extremely few, and the number of disordered states is extraordinarily large. So if you just let things rattle around, they're going to go to more and more disorder because there are more and more and more states that they can fall into, just like the boxes. And I say, okay. You say to the child, there's a broken egg on the kitchen floor. Clean it up. And he says, how do you know it's there? So I saw it there 2 minutes ago. Maybe it's spontaneously organized back into the whole egg? That's possible, isn't it? Yeah, sure, it's possible. It's a chance of 1 in 1 with 14 trillion zeros after it. But it's possible! Yeah, but there's a mess on the floor. Go clean it up. I don't think I have to apologize and say, well, I only think there's a mess there. I don't really know it, because there's a possibility of it spontaneously reorganizing into the whole egg and the floor being clean. No thanks. Yeah, one doesn't have to do that. Good enough evidence, good enough probability is enough to back up knowledge. Now, this is the way I've been doing this for years. It's a whole chapter of my book, and I think what I said is correct. For Americans, there's another way to do it. This was suggested to me by a certain rabbi whose name escapes me at the moment. He's the one who founded Priority One. And he uses the words that you have in American law, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not bad. That's not the way I was trained to use the word proof. But it is a term in American law. When you are trying to convict someone of a crime, the prosecutor has to provide enough evidence to give proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which means those words say, maybe there is a doubt, but it's not reasonable. So, the evidence that I'm offering doesn't nail it down, doesn't make it for sure, doesn't make it necessary that it's true, but any doubt that you're going to raise, which will point at a possible way it goes wrong, is unreasonable. And therefore, it's enough to penalize him. In some cases, even to practice capital punishment. So, we have a weapon, and we have his footprints, and we have his fingerprints, and we have, we even have a photograph of him climbing out of the window, and so forth and so on. And we say, guilty! And the defense attorney says, maybe he has an identical twin who looks just like him. And maybe the identical twin was wearing gloves that imprinted with this twin's fingerprints. That's where the fingerprints come from. Right? We have no clue that he has any siblings at all, right? But maybe. It's possible, isn't it? So they say, well, that creates a doubt, but it's an unreasonable doubt. It's not reasonable to take that doubt into consideration, and we're going to hold him guilty. That's what I would call good reason. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, acknowledging that there could be doubts, but that they're unreasonable. Now, let me tell you the difference this makes in practical terms. If you say you know something and someone challenges you, and especially if he invites you to prove it, then the rules of the game work like this. You present your reasons. He uses his imagination. Can I think up any possibility where it could go wrong? If he can imagine a possibility where it goes wrong, you lose. Because you didn't rule out that possibility. You haven't nailed it down absolutely. You're presenting your research and your evidence, and he's using his imagination to think up another possibility. I think you should reject that game. You should reject that challenge. What you should say to him is this: I'm going to present my evidence that it's true. If you want to challenge my position, either show me other evidence against me, positive evidence against me, that's stronger than my evidence, or show me some reason that my evidence isn't correct, undermine my evidence in some way. Otherwise, agree that I'm right. It's not enough just to think up an alternative, to imagine an alternative. I'm presenting positive reason that I'm right. You present positive reason that I'm wrong. Which again could be one of two ways. Either there's something wrong with my reasons, which will just mean that I've failed to be convincing, or you might do something stronger and present reasons that the opposite is true, and that what I'm saying is incorrect. Either way, that would be an appropriate response to what I'm doing. And that would be a credible challenge to my claim that I know what I'm doing. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering how we could apply this to, say, learning Gemara.
I'll try to get to that before I get to the end of the hour. So now, sometimes this comes out in vocabulary. And the vocabulary doesn't say word for word what I've said, but it implies it. Let me give you some examples of the kind of vocabulary to look out for. So I say, I'm taking this position because of A, B, C, and D. And somebody says, I say, I believe in A. I'll change the number. I believe in A because of 1, 2, 3, 4. and somebody says, how do you know it's not B? Maybe it's B. Now, what is he asking me for? He's asking me to rule out B. What's the claim to fame of B? He thought of it. What's the claim of fame to B? It's possible. So I'm saying A is right because of 1, 2, 3, 4. And he's saying, how do you know it's not B? He's not offering me any reason why it is B. He's not offering me any reason why 1, 2, 3, 4 are a mistake. He's simply saying, how do you know it's not B? Implicitly, what he's challenging me to do is prove it. Knock out alternative possibilities. This is precisely the interchange that I want to avoid. I think what you should say to him is, what reason do you think that it is B? If you have no reason to think that it's B, then you're raising a mere possibility. And mere possibility, I'm not promising to outlaw, to overrule, or to eliminate all alternative possibilities. I'm telling you, I have enough reason to say that this possibility is true. Not that there aren't other possibilities. Somebody says, isn't such and such possible? I think the right thing to say always is, yes, so what? Yeah.
You would call that true versus very likely, or can you call, is it the essence of it true, even though there's other possibilities, or does it just become very, very likely?
Well, see, now, I think if we check the recording, I didn't use the word true tonight at all. I talked about knowledge. And, of course, things can be true even if there are other possibilities, and there can be knowledge even if there are other possibilities. Think of, for example, well, maybe that won't be a good example. But, suppose there's a disagreement about what the weather will be tomorrow. One guy says it's going to rain, the other guy says it's going to be clear. One of them is going to be right. And it's possible that the other will be right, it just won't be right. So clearly, the fact that something else is possible doesn't stop something from being true. And if this fellow looked at the satellite images and he saw the weather patterns in the vicinity and he says it's going to rain, and the other guy didn't look at any satellite images, and he says it's going to be clear, well, sometimes the satellite images give you a wrong projection. That does happen. Maybe once in 10 times or once in 20 times, right? If it rains, the guy who looked at the satellite images and saw that can say, I know because I followed the normal evidence and it is very often correct, and in fact it was correct. Doesn't mean the other was impossible. Sometimes it isn't correct, but in this case it was correct, and he used the reliable evidence to arrive at his conclusion. That seems to be, he had good enough reason to say that it was correct, and in fact was correct. He can say that he knew it was correct. So I think that the fact that there's another alternative doesn't defeat the idea that it was known, and then the fact that it was true. What you don't have is that it's certain, but that's precisely what I'm inveighing against. You don't need to be certain. It doesn't have to be necessarily correct. It just has to be good enough. Now, here's another way, it's a little bit more subtle. Well, let me introduce this with the right terminology. In this connection, there's something called the burden of proof, and then there's a fallacy called shifting the burden of proof. Let's go back to the legal analogy. Let's say a person is accused of a crime. So you have a prosecutor and a defense attorney. The job of the prosecutor is to present evidence that beyond a reasonable doubt he's guilty. What's the job of the defense attorney? The job of the defense attorney is not to show that he's innocent. That's not his job. He might, and if he does, he'll be a hero, but that's not his job. The prosecutor is supposed to present evidence of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defense attorney is supposed to raise a reasonable doubt. If he raises a reasonable doubt, then the prosecutor has failed. Because it was beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecutor has a big job. He has to establish guilt. By the way, I haven't looked this up in the law, but I think that's why when you ask a jury for its verdict, the two possible verdicts are guilty or
non-guilty.
Not guilty. There's no verdict of innocent. There's no verdict of innocent.
If there is proof of innocence?
A second. Not guilty means you didn't prove him guilty. He might be guilty. You didn't prove him guilty. And therefore he's not going to jail. So the defense attorney is just poking holes in the argument of the prosecutor to show the prosecutor has not fulfilled his responsibility to present enough evidence to be correct beyond a reasonable doubt. And he's presenting reasonable doubts. Now, when you have a discussion and one side has a burden of proof, all the other side has to do is raise reasonable doubts. Sometimes, as the discussion goes, this guy has the burden of proof, he's presenting his reasons, and at a certain point, he becomes a little uncomfortable. It's getting tough, He keeps raising these doubts, and I have to keep answering these doubts, and I'm not doing so well, and it's really getting difficult. What he does is, well, if you think you're right, prove that you're right. At that point, you throw down the red flag, and you say, that's a foul. That wasn't the discussion. His job is not to prove that he's right. Indeed, in this discussion, he hasn't got a position. He's not taking the opposite position. He's simply saying, you say you know, I want to hear your reasons, and I want to see whether you can nail it down beyond a reasonable doubt. All he's doing is raising reasonable doubts. But when the guy gets pushed into a corner, he shifts the burden of proof. And one of the ways he shifts the burden of proof is by using the word possible. He's trying to show that A is correct. And he says here's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. They all support A. The support is very strong. And the other guy says, listen, 1 is hearsay. And 2 comes from that old encyclopedia, right, which we agreed you shouldn't use. Remember that? Okay, so we can't learn about 2, And 3, if you're right, then people should have seen it, and nobody saw it, right? And he says, maybe they were all distracted. That's why they didn't see it. Now something very subtle is going on now. Maybe they were all distracted. Well, it's possible, isn't it? It's possible they were distracted. But by saying maybe they were all distracted, what he's offering is a possibility in support of his position. A possibility. That's a foul. I don't ask you what you believe on the basis of its being possible. I ask you what you believe on the basis of its being true. If you have to retreat to the idea that it's possible, you've given up the ship. Show me they were distracted. Show me there was a satellite in the sky and they thought it was a UFO and they were all looking up. That's why they didn't see the guy in the white horse ride down Fifth Avenue. Okay. That's positive evidence. But you have to retreat to possibility. This happens in evolution. It happens in discussions of absolute values. It happens all the time. When you talk to people in evolution about the fossil record, and there are all sorts of holes in the fossil record, lots and lots. And they say, listen, we have, this goes back to the 70s with Eldridge and Gould, we have a mechanism that could produce these changes in such a way that if our mechanism works, you won't find it. Our mechanism is invisible. It's an invisible mechanism. So, evolution could have progressed that way. Who says not? Punctuated equilibria, speciation, tiny, isolated groups over a very short period of time. In evolution, 200,000 years is a short period of time. Could have changed this animal into that animal, and since it's in a very local piece of context, you're not going to find it. You're not going to be lucky enough to drill down to that particular one. And then the number of levels in that short period of time geologically is very small. You're not going to find it. But look what's happened. I asked him, why should I believe you? He says, I've got the fossils. Here are all the fossils. But there's a big hole right there. Well, it could be that it happened even though there's a hole. Yeah, sure, there could be leprechauns also. There could be pixies also. Lots of things could be. You believe it's true because it could be? You better go back to school. Could be is not a reason to believe that it is true. When you say it could be, what you're doing is inviting the other guy to prove you're wrong. That wasn't the project. The project was for you to present your reasons thinking that it's right and present them in such a way that there's enough evidence to establish it beyond a reasonable doubt. So you have to be very, very careful not to allow the shifting of burden of proof. And it happens almost, I would say it's almost, I'm not saying that this is a premeditated, fallacious move on the part of some charlatans who are trying to trick you. No, it's almost instinctive, where you shift from presenting positive evidence that you're right to defending yourself against an attack and pointing out that if the attack doesn't succeed, you still might be right. The minute you do that, you've given up the ship. I give you might be right. I give you that anything is possible. As long as it's not self-contradictory, it's possible. But I'm not interested in what's possible. I'm interested in what's true. In order to convince me what's true, you've got to give me positive evidence that it is in fact the case. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. I was a little lost in the middle. You said something about invisible proof. Something
According to evolution, things have to change very slowly. Because the bigger the change, the bigger the probability that it will just disrupt the organism and it won't be able to live. And Darwin said this. And he said over and over again, if it would be impossible to achieve this particular structure by slow, gradual changes, then my theory would be wrong. Okay, you have cases in the fossil record, many, where things come into existence full-blown. There's nothing before it, or changes take place in lineages which are substantial with nothing in between. Right? So they say, you said it's got to be gradual, and it isn't gradual. So here's what they answer. It is gradual, but it's gradual in a place which you won't find. Because, let's say, you're talking about the wildebeest on the plains of Central Africa. And you've got 1,000 miles in this direction and 500 miles in that direction. You got a long thing, and you have millions and millions of these things, and they got them all in the fossil record. And what you find in the fossil record is that they look the same for about 2 million years. And then after that, they look substantially different. And then those fine gradations. So the thought is this. I'm burlesquing this, but this was the thought of Eldridge and Gould. Imagine that there's a terribly frightening storm, or an earthquake, or something like that, and the wildebeest are stampeding in all different directions, wildly, and there's a mountain pass, which they usually don't go over, but now they're all scattering and scrambling for their lives, and about 500 of them go over this mountain pass, and go down to the valley, and they're in such shock and confusion they don't remember how they got there, and so on and so on. And some are males and some are females, and it's a small valley which could support about 500 wildebeest living there, on the vegetation and so on and so on. And now, when the storm clears, they don't remember how to get back, so they're stuck in the valley. In the valley, with a very small population, changes can take place and spread throughout the population quickly. Again, quickly could be 200,000 years instead of 2 million. So, for 100,000 years, they're in the valley, and they're breeding away, and the hooves get sharper, and the teeth get sharper, and the balance gets better, and the legs get longer, and so forth and so on. And then there's an earthquake, and a mountain pass splits, and the valley is reunited with the plains, and out onto the plains come 500 of the new, improved wildebeest. Wow! This is, Model A to Model Z. They come out and they outcompete the old wildebeest. And after some years, they repopulated the whole plain with the new ones rather than the old ones. And then when you dig down, you're not going to find that one little valley. You're going to dig down in the plains. So you come down first to the new improved wildebeest, and they're the same for about 2 million years, and then you go down, all of a sudden you get the old version of wildebeest, which are considerably different. And that's saying this is what they called punctuated equilibrium. When you look at the fossil record, you find equilibrium, that means no change for a long period of time. They have a punctuation. A punctuation means some kind of rapid major transition, and then again stasis, right? Equilibrium. So here's the answer. The answer is it's happening where you can't see it. That's why you don't find it. No, is that evidence or is that a possibility? It's just a possibility. Otherwise, you'd have to have evidence that it really happened that way. Now, Stephen Jay Gould was one of the two who concocted this idea, realized that, and his magnum opus, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory, 1,400 pages, which I read, he says, I know that you'll ask me, what evidence do I have that it actually happened that way? And he said, listen, if you study the genes, you could see this marker or this marker, perhaps this marker would supplement. He has a whole speculation there as to how you could actually put together positive evidence that it happened that way. Because otherwise, he's a good enough logician to realize all he's done is appeal to a possibility. You can't support the truth of a theory on the basis of its being possible to overcome this objection. That's no way to support the truth of a theory. But that's what happens. When you talk about objective values, somebody said values are objective, and somebody says they aren't objective. So I like to put the burden of proof on the relativist who says there aren't objective values, and I ask him for his arguments. I've done this, it's recorded, and the arguments are terrible. They're really very poor, very poor. At some point or other, he says, well, if you think that they're objective, you prove they're objective. Now, listen to what he's saying. What he's saying is, I believe that they're, call it subjective or relative, I don't care. Right? I believe they're, let's say, relative. You think they're objective, show me they're objective. And if you don't, I win. I win, then they're really relative. That's completely irrational. He's supposed to be showing that they're relative. He fails. Now suppose he invites the guy who thinks they're absolute to present his reasons. He presents his reasons that they're absolute, and he fails. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is both have failed, and we don't know the truth. Not that the relativist wins. Why should he win? He can't back up what he says, then he doesn't win. He can't back up what he says, so he doesn't win. So neither one of them wins. So they should shake hands and agree that they're both ignorant of the truth and go off and drink a beer together. Right? And the same thing is true in discussions of religion. Right? I put the burden on the atheist. But suppose somebody says to you, prove to me there's a God. So the first thing you should say is, no. No, sorry. I'm not. By the way, I want to point out something else. Listen to the words, prove to me that there's a God. That makes his response to judge of whether you succeeded or not. All he has to say at the end is, well, I don't believe it, so you didn't prove it to me. And that convicts you of failing. That's one reason why you should reject the project. You should say to him, first of all, I don't believe in proof. I present reasons. And second of all, if I present reasons and you can't refute them and you're still not convinced, that's not my problem. My project is to present reasons. That's my responsibility. If you can undermine my reasons or present opposing reasons of good enough value, then I'll admit that I haven't succeeded. But if I present reasons and you just announce yourself unconvinced, you have a problem. You're not convinced by reasons. Well, I think that's something you should think about. Weigh your employment chances and your marriage chances. If you're the kind of person who isn't convinced by reasons, you may have some handicaps. And prove to me that that there's a God. But what happens is that the same attitude is expressed. He's saying, prove to me there's a God, and the implication is, if you can't, then I'm right to remain an atheist. But that's a mistake. That's a mistake. To be an atheist and be justified, to claim to know that atheism is correct, would be to give positive reason that atheism is correct, not just to have the opposition fail. Because if the believer fails and the atheist fails, then they both fail. They should just both admit, they should both just admit ignorance. And here there's a supplementary thought that some people offer. I've even seen people who I thought were responsible write this. I cannot dream where they're coming from. When you're talking about a discussion whether something exists or not, the default position is always that it doesn't exist. That means the burden of proof is only on the part of the person who says it exists. If he can't meet that burden of proof, if he can't give us good enough reason to believe that it exists, then it's appropriate to say that it doesn't exist. I don't know, those are the words that they say, but they are absolute gobbledygook. The thief who committed murder, is running for his life, ran into your neighborhood. He ran into the backyards of the houses, and he disappeared. Is he in your house or not? I don't know. You don't know either, right? You didn't see him go into my house, did you? No. So there's no proof he went into my house, right? So he's not there. Really? Because there's no proof he went into your house, he's not there? That's the conclusion that you draw? Because you put the burden of proof on the one who says it is. And the default position is that it isn't. So, you're adopting the default position. Since no one can prove he's in my house, it's perfectly appropriate for me to believe he isn't there. I hope you don't take that attitude the rest of your life. How about infected food? Food that's been exposed to bacteria or something. So, he believes in the presence of bacteria, and he believes in the absence of bacteria. The burden of proof is on the guy who says there's bacteria there. Let him prove there's bacteria. He can't, so then you're perfectly justified in believing that it's pure. I don't think so, because it might be infected, right? You know? How about positive reason that it's not infected? You know, that's been sealed and it's vacuum sealed and there are no infections in the areas of the... No. If you can't prove it's in there, then you have to believe it's not there. Absolutely not. Just, the bottom line is, you took a position, give reason for it. You want to claim you know that something's true, whether it's positive or negative, makes absolutely no difference. Makes absolutely no difference. You want to claim that you know that it's true, so then give good reason for its being so. Whether it's positive or negative. Okay, so now the question will be, how much reason is good enough reason? Now this is, I can't give a general answer for. It depends a lot on the kind of question it is and what the consequences are. Was it right to demote Pluto demote it from being a planet? Some astronomers say yes, some astronomers say no, and so most astronomers don't really care. You know, nothing hangs on it. Nothing practical is important about it. When you're dealing with something that has practical effects, that's another matter. Then the standard of proof is dictated in large part by what are the practical effects and what do you expect. And here, I also have a chapter on this in my book. And here, certain issues come in which, I'll discuss a couple of them, which, there's more in the book than I can tell you now. Suppose somebody said this, look, I'm trying to make up my mind what to do. Let's say I'm working with probability, rough probability. How much probability do I need to make up my mind? Well, let's say 50% plus one item. Some say 51%, it's not strictly speaking correct. 50% plus. So somebody says, look, that depends upon what the stakes are. If it's winning or losing $1,000, you know, or something that's, you know, reasonable, yeah. But if it's a big stake, you know, my job, or 5 years of health or something, if it's a big stake, I want a bigger probability than just 50% plus. I want to have good reason to think I'm doing the right thing. That idea, put that way, is dead wrong. It's dead wrong. I'll give you an example. Somebody has a complex of symptoms. He goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that these symptoms are characteristic of two different diseases, A and B. Could be A, could be B. And we have a surefire cure for A and a surefire cure for B. That's the good news. The bad news is that if you have disease A and you take the cure for B, you're dead in 6 months. And if you have disease B and you take the cure for A, you're dead in 6 months. So, there's a certain question as to what you should do. And the patient says, well, doctor, you've left out one important piece of information. What's the probability that I have A? What's the probability that I have B? And he says, that's my last piece of bad news. Probability that you have A is 48%. Oh, you have B is 52%. Difference of 4%. This is life and death. Hard to get stakes bigger than those. Should he say, life and death? I can't decide a life and death question on 4%. What should I do? Take neither of them? That doesn't sound right. Then I'm for sure going to die. I'll flip a coin, because how can I decide? Isn't that the wrong answer? Isn't the right answer to take B because he has a 4% higher chance of living? So the size of the stakes doesn't determine how big the probability has to be. If the outcomes are balanced, so then get the extra probability wherever you can get it, whatever size it is. You have a somewhat better chance of living. So, having said that, some people say, well, Rabbi, you've left out one important question. How much do the cures cost? Maybe the cure for A is free and the cure for B costs $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, whatever it is. Isn't there a limit of how much money you would pay to get the extra 4% probability? Now here I find people's intuitions divide. Some people say, what good will the $1 million be for me if I'm dead? If I'm dead, I can't do anything with it. So well, why shouldn't I spend $1 million? Other people say no. So, and I don't know here how to establish what's right and what's wrong. I don't think it's anything clearly irrational about saying there's a certain cutoff point that I would. But if we are talking about religion as I am, and about Judaism as I am in my book, I think that people who exaggerate the price of living a religious lifestyle are guilty of exaggeration. When you are first acquainted with the way religious Jews live, and you compare it with your present lifestyle, you might find it inhibits some things that you otherwise would like to do, like running guns to the Palestinians. No, that's not what I mean. Scuba diving on Saturdays and cheeseburgers and other interesting activities. But when you take account of the statistics of the social and psychological ills that you risk by living a non-religious lifestyle, like divorce, like drug addiction and or alcoholism, like having very dysfunctional relationships with your children, like the lack of community support when you're in trouble and you need help, whereas the community support in religious communities is exquisite. You ask yourself, what's the probability that living a non-religious lifestyle will be happier, healthier, and longer than living a religious lifestyle? If anything, the probability is the opposite. They did a study here in Israel some years ago, and they discovered that the Haredi population, that's the super fanatic religious population, lives longer, healthier, and happier lives than the general population. They were astounded. We have the largest percentage below the poverty line. Shouldn't poverty mean all the social ills? Drug addiction and suicide and all the rest? Somehow in this population it doesn't work that way. So I think that although philosophically, if a person takes a position that there's a certain amount I would pay for extra probability of being true, but it's not unlimited, I can't convict a person of that like that of making a philosophical mistake. But the proposition that in our case there's a sizable price to pay, I think is greatly exaggerated. And I would strongly recommend that you not draw any conclusions about this on your own judgment, or on what you heard, or what you read, but go and ask an expert. We had a fellow here in Ohr Somayach over 40 years ago. I didn't deal with him, a friend of mine did. He told me the story. He was here for about 3 months. He was a fellow, I guess, in his 40s. And then one day he comes in and says to the rabbi, well, that's it, Rabbi, I'm out of here. It's over. He said, well, really? I mean, I thought you were getting interested. Yeah, but it's not for me. Why not? You have a law that I can't keep. I'm not capable of keeping it, and I'm not, What's that law? Kol Isha. Listening to the voices of women singing. So, Kol Isha. Listening to the voice of women singing. That's why you're not going to become a religious Jew? He says, well, Rabbi, I didn't tell you my profession. I'm an opera critic. That's my job, to go to opera performances and listen to them and then write up an evaluation of the performance. I'm not giving up my job, Rabbi. So the rabbi said, listen, let's go to an expert. No, I know, you're going to get me an excuse. You're going to get me a compromise. I don't do things that way. I either do it right or I don't do it right. I'm out of here. So he finally convinced him to go. He went to Rabbi Yoshev. The rabbi explained the question to him. And Rabbi Yoshev turned on my friend and said, dope, ignoramus. My friend only wanted to die, crawl under the table and die. He said, you didn't hear the Gemara says, Umanishani? Can a Jewish man be a doctor and treat women? The Gemara asked the question. The Gemara says, yes, because when you're engaged in your profession, your mind is on your profession. He's sitting there with his laptop, listening to the music and writing tomorrow's column. That's what he's doing. So don't draw any conclusions on your own as to what can and cannot be done. Find out from an expert whether it can be done or not. There are cases where people have had to make substantial sacrifices. One fellow who was going to become a concert pianist, and he did, and he does travel the world, but he doesn't play on Shabbos. And that definitely costs him. So he decided to pay that cost. So, I wouldn't say that it never happens, but it doesn't happen nearly as much as people imagine, and they don't take adequate account of the probability on the other side that there are compensating factors that make it worthwhile. So, I hope this encourages you to think in terms of good reason rather than proof, not only here, but in life generally. The demand for proof is a mistake. When somebody says to me, when somebody says to you, prove it to me, I think you should offer to buy him a tea. And have a nice afternoon. Okay.